Welcome, everyone. How's it going? It may be morning, it may be afternoon, it may be evening. We don't know. But welcome to what we are for now calling the Ace Tennis Preview Show or something. We're looking for names, folks. Get in the comments. Find us on Twitter. We'd love some suggestions for names. I'm Noops. You may know me as Alex. To my, I guess, left on your screen is Steve. He's wearing the little Ace Preview shirt. Steve, do you want to wave to the people? How are you, Steve? How's it going? Beard looks nice.
I am good. We've had, today is the 6th day in a row here of 0 COVID-19 cases, and I woke up this morning to news that the whole Australian Summer of Tennis might be in Melbourne, which is about 20 minutes down the road from me. So look, it's looking okay at the moment. It's looking a lot better than it did a couple of months ago, but I guess more importantly, I think most of the news over here has been what's been happening on your side of the world. Who's your president? I hear you've got 2 at the moment.
Well, for now, we know it's Donald Trump till the end of the year. We're not really sure what happens at that point. It seems that Joe Biden may win whatever will be the first tally, but we'll not get into that stuff. Instead, we'll ask Candice how she's doing. She was handicapping the Melbourne Cup. How are the ponies this weekend?
They're still running. We still have the Melbourne Cup Carnival going on today. So I am very much here in California, but on Steve's time zone because that's my life right now, Australian horses.
Wonderful.
It's a little bit sad that, like, look, I've been to the Melbourne Cup Carnival most years, at least one day. It is a little bit sad seeing absolutely no one there, but look, it's probably going to be a little bit quieter around that 5 o'clock day. I think Oaks Day, 5 to 6 p.m. is normally a little bit. It can become a little bit of a nightmare, I think, for a lot of people trying to find their way out of Flemington. So it might be a little bit calmer today, I think.
More time for them to watch us.
Exactly.
I like the way you're thinking. Now, we've talked about the election. We've talked about horses. We've talked about things getting better in Australia, but nobody really cares about any of that. We're here to talk about tennis, folks. The men are in Paris. They're indoors. They're playing. All sorts of things are happening. Steve, I think I'll pass it to you. Do you want to get us started here as we go down to, I guess, what is this, the second round?
So look, the second round's just finishing up at the moment. So as we go live at the moment, I think, is it Stanford Rinker and Tommy Paul are still getting about on court. Let me just have a quick look. So they're at 1 set all. But look, it's a really interesting period here in terms of from a ranking standpoint. We've got a lot of players trying to rack up some points here late in the year. It's a free hit for a lot of players. Obviously, the rankings freeze until March. So look, it's not your standard Masters 1000 third round. Looking at some of the players that we're seeing here compared to some other years. But look, it's been interesting. There's obviously been some news overnight with Rafael Nadal winning his 1000th tour match, which is a phenomenal effort, and it kind of shows that there's only been 3 others to do it before him. So look, he's obviously the one to beat here. But Paris on the hard courts hasn't always been a happy hunting ground for him. If we just have a look here on the screen here, that I think, had you told Nadal that his 3rd round match would be against Jordan Thompson, I think he probably would have taken that at the start of the tournament. But look, it's been a bit of a trick one. We've seen Goffin disappear out of the draw. Chorich, who I thought was really good in the first round, obviously lost there in 3 sets from a setup to Thompson. So look, it is set up a little bit here for Nadal. But look, I'd be keeping an eye on Pablo Carreño Busta. I think the conditions seem to suit him a little bit more here probably than we saw last week when he failed to put in an exceptional effort in a very straightforward loss. So look, he's one to keep an eye on, but there's a reason why Nadal's the favourite in this section. Is there anything here that stands out to either of you two, or have you got your eyes elsewhere in this part of the draw?
Nothing really sticks out for me. I like what you said for PCP. I think being indoors is actually good for him. It's a funny thing to say about a Spanish player. Usually you think about them as clay dynamos, but he's actually really comfortable here. I think he has, the easier of the 2 matches so far. I don't think he's necessarily going to be afraid of Nadal, and we're not at a slam here. So he gets a chance for a 3-set match where you only have to beat Nadal twice instead of 3 times. But like you said, it's Nadal or pass here. Let's see if he's interested. It's interesting to think about the motivation. Like you said, there's a lot of points on the line here. And, given the rankings rules, I think are going to update at the beginning of next year. This is a good chance for people to get themselves in a good shape for next year. Do you have anything to add, Candice?
Not a ton. I mean, we'll get to it a little bit, I suppose, as we go through the matches that are remaining for this group. But I think the big key that Steve touched on that is going to be key here is, again, what is the motivation for a guy like Nadal versus some of the others who really need these points, whether it's to qualify for the ATP final for a couple of them, Schwartzman in particular, or, as you say, to kind of bolster some points here at the end of the season with that freeze taking place. It almost feels like, if I was going to use a horse racing equivalent, I suppose it almost feels like this is the prep race for the big race. And some guys, they don't need to win here. They have bigger and better things going forward, as we suppose. And some guys really, really need to put in a big forward performance in here. So the motivations between some of the top players like a Nadal versus some of the others might be different, and it might wind up making the difference.
And I think that's the thing when you look at this, and look, Nadal wasn't overly convincing, to be honest, with his victory over Feliciano Lopez. I mean, we can go back through this section. I thought that Nadal was going to have to face Krajinovic and then Coric to make his way to the quarterfinals, and he's ended up with Lopez and Thompson. It probably hasn't given us a great indication of where Nadal is at. We haven't seen him since Roland Garros until this moment. And look, to be down a set and find himself in a tight tiebreak against Lopez, it's not the best start. I guess my strategy looking at this quarter at the moment would be, look, I don't think there's probably a lot of benefit jumping into Carreño Busta in an outright price at the moment. I'd probably almost sit and wait and see if we do get a Carreño Busta versus Nadal quarterfinal, that we might actually get a nice price there on Carreño Busta to cause an upset. Just looking at the strength of what we're going to see in the second quarter, which we might flick over to now, I think there's going to be a few names here that, even if Carreño Busta were to get past Nadal, there are players here with significant indoor hardcourt form under their belt over the last couple of weeks to months that would be trickier and look, at their best, would probably be too good for Carreño Busta. Now, if we have a look, I've just popped the second quarter up on the screen here for now for those watching along. Alex, I know you are, and look, Alexander Zverev and Adrian Manarino have had a couple of battles over the last couple of months, and I know that this is a matchup that you love. Any thoughts on this particular one, or anything standing out to you in this particular quarter at the moment that, look, on recent form has been dominated by one Andrei Rublev?
When I look at the match at the top, I guess maybe to take a step back and look at the entire quarter, similar to the first quarter, I start to think about it from the perspective of, instead of Nadal pass here, Rublev or pass. I think he's played some of the best tennis of anybody since we've had the restart. The conditions are fantastic for him. He's looking at a match against the winner of this Wawrinka-Tommy Paul match, which looks like it's going to be a long three-setter. So he should be fresh after beating the pants off Albo today. He's going to get the winner of Zverev-Manarino, which I think is going to be a really tight match. I'm going to be looking at overs there. I haven't pulled it up yet, but I'm going to try to see what the odds are for there to be a tiebreaker in this match. I think that Manarino has a chance, just frankly, to be the mentally superior player. I mean, everything anybody knows about tennis would say that Zverev is by far the more talented player here. If he comes out and plays his best tennis, he probably should take care of Manarino here. This might actually be kind of quick, but that's not what I'm seeing. I think that there's a lot of distractions here for Zverev, so I'm going to be looking for angles to bet Manarino and maybe some overs there. But, again, from an outright perspective, it's Rublev or pass for me here. It's tough, though, with Rublev having to play Nadal coming out of the first quarter.
Yeah, look, I probably tend to agree there. And as someone who, look, I was on Manarino to beat Zverev at the US Open, and look, it was a pretty tight game until he ended up picking up an injury in that third set, and obviously there was all those quarantine issues. And look, long story short, he shouldn't have played cards with Benoit Paire. That was probably his downfall more than anything. They played again. Was it last week or the week before, and went. It was a tight three-setter. So look, there hasn't been a big gulf between the two players compared to, what Zverev's put up against, a couple of other players over the last couple of weeks. So, look, I think, and I agree with you there, that I think it'll probably be closer than or looking at it at the moment, that probably the overs looks to be a nice play there when you add in that, Zverev's had, whilst he's obviously on top of things with his results recently, there's obviously a lot going on in his life at the moment that, given the phase and time of the year that we're at, that it's going to be, I think it's as you said there, Rublev looks to be the pick. If you had to pick one at the moment, as Wawrinka and Paul are still stuck in a third set while we speak, it's very hard to look past Andrei Rublev.
Yeah, again, looking at some of those lines, plus 4.5 for Mannarino, I think I'm going to play that. The over-under sitting right at 21. I'll probably look at that a little more, but that should probably be closer to 22 in my opinion. Again, still pulling up the lines on the over half on a tiebreaker. That seems to be hard to find for whatever reason. But usually that's right around plus 200 or 3.0 if you're a decimal person. I think anything in that range or better is definitely something I'll be betting.
Anything stand out here in terms of, I guess, what's happened so far this week or the players left there, Candice?
I suppose for me, there wouldn't be anything in particular that would stand out there. I think for me, I'm looking a little bit further down the draw. I don't know when we're going to get there next or maybe a little bit after this, but the next couple of matches, there we go, magic. The next couple of matches for me, I personally found the most intriguing just from kind of analyzing them to begin with, because you're getting a couple of players now who are coming into the tournament in very, very good form. We look at Schwartzman against Davidovich Fokina, and both of these players have been surging here at the end of the season. We, of course, saw what Schwartzman did over at the U.S. Open, and I think he had a little bit more of a high-profile run, but Davidovich Fokina had basically a career best performance over at the U.S. Open when he reached the round of 16 as well. And this match to me is interesting because we know Schwartzman overall is the better player, and he's been basically serving out of his mind, which has gotten him to the extent of success that he's had here over the last couple of months. And obviously his defending ability is probably one of the best on tour. But you wonder, for one, how long can he sustain that high first serve rate? And at the same time, I wonder, is Davidovich Fokina more suited by the conditions that we have here being indoors? We know that his serve is very, very good, and he's able to really put pace on his forehand, and that gives him maybe an advantage against Schwartzman. So this match for me is potentially going to be kind of a real difficult one, I think, for Schwartzman. If he can somehow maneuver his way through this, then I think a big run is very, very possible for him. But in a race where one of the men has had such a large profile here at the end of the year in Diego Schwartzman, I could potentially see him go down if Davidovich Fokina is willing to go out there and be aggressive and use his drop shot and use that kind of versatility that he has in his arsenal to pull Schwartzman off of the baseline.
And I think that's that. And you raise a good point there with the drop shot. That was something that absolutely killed Khachanov earlier in the week. That he used his drop shot at such key times and so effectively that was the difference. But as you said, that first serve percentage is going to be crucial for him, because his second serve just doesn't quite have the power on it. And Diego, even though you look at his size and he doesn't look at he is one of the best returners of serve that we have on the tour at the moment. So look, I agree with you, and I think they're probably lucky looking at this match, and this is one to maybe get a little bit more involved with, because that Schwartzman's playing for a spot in the tour finals, and we know that both of these players are looking for really key results here across the week. Any thoughts on the lower portion of this quarter with Demonor versus Medvedev, or anything stand out there between these two players? One, in if you had to pick the player that's probably been in better form, you're probably looking at the Australian.
Oh, 100%. It's not even close. I mean, and this is another match where you wonder if there's a little bit of value there, because people look to Medvedev. Again, this is the better player, right? He's the name. He's higher seated here, but when we were talking a bit before we went on air, he's been woeful this year. Him as a player this year has been nothing compared to last year, and he's had his cupcake way into this draw. He had the bye in the first round, and then he wound up making his way through because of his player ended up defaulting. So for him, he hasn't really had to do anything, so we don't really know what to expect after the Kevin Anderson retirement from Medvedev. If he's the Medvedev of last year, then of course he wins this, but there's no way to know that. And I would lean towards saying he's not, because we've just seen no evidence of that through the shorter season we've had thus far. de Minaur, as you say, comes in here in very good form for the most part. And, this is a guy who I think to some degree also brings that variability, that variation in with his game. And this year, we've seen a real change in him in that he's become maybe even more of a defensive player. And if Medvedev is struggling a touch with his consistency, I can see de Minaur as that player with that defensive style really frustrating him.
And I think that's the case with de Minaur as well, that if you do beat him, it's you've really earned it, and it can really set up your week. And it shows that when you go back through that, any player that has beaten de Minaur has generally had pretty good results in terms of the rest of the tournament, because he is such a tough out, and it's he isn't going to give you anything too cheaply. Any thoughts through this quarter here, Alex, or are you still thinking about Rublev in the second quarter?
As I start to look at this quarter, as we talked, I was kind of thinking about Medvedev, but, Candice, you make a great point. He's been in really poor form. When I look at that match, my only angle that I really have there, I'm going to look at some set unders, maybe watch a little bit how they play. I think that if, maybe the first set is tight and de Minaur wins it, I think the second set could be pretty quick. I would look for an under overall, but Medvedev loves to play 3-set matches. You might get a chance at a 3-set under with the 22 or 22.5 I'm seeing. But, in general, I think this quarter is kind of tough. Again, based on what you see from a statistical perspective, what from the names, you think Medvedev should blast through here, but I don't know. I think Candice made a good case for Schwartzman, but I'm still not excited. I think he's somebody that's going to be overmatched when you get later in the tournament. So maybe like a price for him to win the quarter or something. But I don't know if I like him to win the whole thing.
I would almost argue, looking into the match further and having spoken about it further, I would almost argue, I was just looking through, some of the set overs for Schwartzman and Davidovich Fokina. And I would almost make a case betting the under and then betting Davidovich Fokina to win. Even if Schwartzman seems more likely to go forward, for Davidovich Fokina to win, I think he has to win quickly. So I would look to be perhaps going that direction. Just pick him outright to win the match and then take the under, knowing that for him to, the longer this match goes, the more that it helps Schwartzman, right? And I think that's almost the case in both of the matches we have here. The longer that the second match goes, I think the more that it favors de Minaur. So you have kind of those kind of ways, I suppose, you have to look at it. And I think the best way to look at these two is, if you like the underdogs, take those matches to maybe end rather quickly, because that's probably the only way it's going to happen.
What do you think of Fokina 2-0 plus 350?
Oh, you could certainly start to tempt me. I suppose that. Far and away, I think the Schwartzman Davidovich Fokina match is the one that interests me the most from a betting perspective, and I would certainly be looking towards Davidovich Fokina and towards him winning the match quickly. At 22 right now, that's appealing to me for the under.
Yeah, look, I tend to agree. And look, it's one of those ones that, there's a couple of people who I respect very, very highly last week who took the Sonego versus Djokovic under 20, I think it was. And look, that's the beauty of unders, that, sometimes, and I tend to agree here that I don't see Schwartzman losing a long match, I think, here between these two. So I definitely tend to agree with that one. And look, yeah, de Minaur, I'm going to be a little bit biased, and you'll see me talking about de Minaur over the next couple of months, probably because I am on him at 125 to 1 to win the Australian Open. So anything that helps him regain form or confidence heading into Melbourne is something that I am all for. But I think we're going to get a really good test of and a good idea of where Medvedev is at the end of what's been a pretty disappointing run for him since the tour restarted. Now, when you look at these players and you look at the top half, and you look at Nadal, you look at Zverev, and you look at Rublev, there are opportunities here. And when we head to the fourth quarter, those opportunities, become a lot clearer when you look at the other four players that we have left here. Berrettini's gone. Auger Aliassime was knocked out in the first round and then found a COVID positive patient or player to make his way through via walkover into the third round. So he's trying to find some form. We have the Antwerp champion in Humbert, knock off Tsitsipas in pretty impressive fashion. I think it was over 3 hours, 15 minutes and a whole bunch of tie breaks. It really does open things up here. But I had a certain Canadian in Raonic make me look a little bit silly the other day, thinking that he may have been a little bit more hurt than he was. But he has looked incredibly impressive through his first couple of rounds. I don't know if either of you have seen any action from any of these players, but I don't know if you're happy for me to talk to the 4 players we have left here, but I'm intrigued by Raonic, and I don't know if, Alex, you've got odds there at all on his match coming up with Giron, who was able to knock off the Italian Berrettini.
It looks like Raonic is -4, but that's pretty juicy. So my guess is he's probably 4.5 everywhere else. The money line's -750, so really, really short there. Total right at 22. So maybe look at an under there. Maybe look to sell to -5 games or something. I think I actually like the under better than -5, but you're kind of looking in those ranges.
Yeah. And look, I tend to agree with that, and it's a really tricky one with Raonic because. And we were talking before we came on air that you look at his performances early in tournaments, and you always think there that this is going to be the one that Raonic takes to burst his way back up the rankings even more than he already has. I thought that was going to happen in Antwerp, and then he pulled out before the quarterfinal with Grigor Dimitrov. He's looked pretty good across his 4 sets here, and look, the only thing stopping me from suggesting him from an outright perspective, because the Tour finals are still in play for him as well, the only thing stopping me is the fact that I don't know if his body can hold it together for a whole week. It's looking through this section. I think if he plays his best and if he plays at a level he has this week, he won in round 1 with a really poor first serve percentage. He's going really big on that first serve. He's looking for cheap points. Even more so than he has in the past. I think, he was putting some aces down at 235 kilometers an hour in round 1 in pretty heavy conditions. My only worry is that he's going to hurt himself. And it's kind of been the story of his career a little bit, hasn't it?
It's something you always have to think about with him. Like you said, he's playing really well. As you start to look at everybody that's in this group, I don't know who's going to come at him with a lot of variety or present him with a match that's not on his racket. So, if he continues to serve well, continues to get those first serves in, and can stay healthy, and sounds pretty simple, but historically that's a lot to ask of Milos.
It's a lot to ask of him, and I wonder as well, the guys like him who struggle to, as you say, get all the way through a tournament without having some kind of a small niggle pop up. The guys you don't want to be playing, I would say, are guys like Giron, who's been another one who's just been sensational since the tour restarted. We've seen it even go into the beginning of this tournament. I mean, I don't know how much we're going to put stock into him defeating Goffin the way that he had been playing. But, I mean, for him, that was his first win, I believe, over a top 20 player. So that was a really big deal. And how often we see people who get those big, career-making victories and then wind up losing the next match. And yet he was able to back it up with an even better win. So if Raonic isn't at the level that we've seen of him here early in the tournament, or if something pops up, I don't think this is the player that he wants to be up against.
Yeah, look, I'd agree. And look further to it with this quarter. I'm going to put Marin Cilic on notice a little bit here. I saw, I think, his comments after his win against Auger-Aliassime, and he was very positive in terms of his regaining form. I'm just trying to grab the quote up now, but it seems to have escaped me. But he was very, very confident in terms of regaining his best form or potentially playing, the best tennis of his career, which when you've won a Grand Slam in the past and you've then had injury after injury and everything started to catch up with him, it's a very easy thing to say when you've then had a walkover in the second round as well. This is a huge test for him against an up-and-coming player in Humbert. I'm fascinated by this match. I don't think I can get involved with it from a betting perspective. I think we're going to see a lot of, we're going to find out a lot about Humbert backing up. That was an impressive win over Tsitsipas, who did say, though, that his injury flared up again in the second set. Look, his injury seems to flare up whenever he loses at the moment, so it's hard to gauge just how much of an impact that had. But I'm fascinated by this match, and it's a little bit of a changing of the guard match, I think, here. That, you know, is Cilic able to regain that form and, you know, take another scalp over a young player, or is Humbert going to say, look, I've won Antwerp, I'm just going to keep the good form here running and make a play here for the title at home. It sets up as an interesting match when you look at the players, although it might not be the strongest quarter left here. Any final thoughts from you, Alex?
I think that Cilic Humbert match is going to be an awful watch, but I think that we have an opportunity here to look at some set overs here. I think the first set over, I'm looking -9.5 is pretty juicy. I'm trying to see if there's a 10.5 anywhere. They haven't opened up tiebreaker prices. I think that a tiebreaker, yes, like even out to -150 or something, is something I'm interested in here. So I think that there's some good betting angles from here. I'm just not 100% sure I'll be interested in watching.
And just flicking back to the second quarter, to you, Alex, as we said, you were talking before about Rublev in this particular part. Now that Stan Wawrinka he's currently has match point against Tommy Paul with a double break, so we'll assume that Stan will win. Does that change your opinion here at all in this one?
Not particularly. I think that Rublev in the form that he's in is, it's Wawrinka. He's very good, but I think Rublev is going to take care of business there. I don't think that that's too much of a problem. Zverev beats Manarino. Maybe that's a little tougher. It's just hard to bet Rublev. He has the toughest path of anybody left. Wawrinka, Zverev, Nadal, and then whoever comes out of the bottom half. I don't think anybody is even close to how tough that path is. So I would need some sort of number that we're not going to see, something in like a double digits. And again, I don't think that's happening.
Yeah, and look, I think that's where this draw at the moment is very precariously placed. That if you put Rublev or even if you put Zverev into the bottom half, you'd probably be jumping at them from an outright perspective. But just the fact that that, looking through it, that we're going to have, come the final, that one of Schwartzman, Davidovich, De Minaur, Medvedev, Giron, Raonic, Cilic, or Humbert is going to be in the final, and Zverev, Rublev, and Nadal and Carreño Busta even need to slug it out to make it. It makes for an interesting finish off to the tour in terms of big tournaments, just as Stan Wawrinka has finished off that victory coming from a set down. So he was able to defeat Tommy Paul 4-6, 7-6, 6-2 in just under 2.5 hours. Now,
I think Tommy Paul was +3, so I think that's a push. If you had Paul on the spread, hopefully you got 3.5.
Look at you with your quick maths on the fly. That's impressive.
It's tough. It's addition, subtraction, a lot.
It's so complex.
It's nice to do it right.
Any final thoughts on the overall Paris draw as it stands, or any particular standout? If you had to pick one player from here, where are you looking?
I guess if I had to pick somebody just to win, again, it's probably Rublev. But if I'm looking from an outright perspective, I think I'd go back maybe and do some homework, watch that Humbert-Tsitsipas match and see if Humbert was good more than maybe Tsitsipas wasn't, and see what numbers come out. I think you're going to get a really fat number on Humbert. And similar to what I said about Raonic, Humbert might just be able to serve his way through. I mean, if he continues to hold at this rate and get into tiebreakers, he doesn't mind that, and he has the game to kind of chop it up. And I think that you'll get a really nice number on him. Again, we'll see what happens with Raonic, but if you are going to bet some outrights when the market reopens, I guess probably in a couple hours, I'd be looking again at maybe Raonic, Bear, and then whoever you think wins that third quarter.
Fair enough. It's so refreshing listening to you talk about men's tennis. That's so often here that you're normally picking Halep or. Well,
I know. I keep looking for Andreescu and I keep looking for Serena, but I guess she doesn't play this event.
No, that's right. We'll get to them in a minute. Don't worry about that.
All right, fine.
Candice, any pick?
Oh, I would be waiting for now. I'm really, again, looking to that quarter where we have Schwartzman and we have Davidovich Fokina and we have can't even remember who the other one was now. We have Medvedev, that group. I think De Minaur. I think that's the quarter where I'm looking. That seems to be the strongest of the bottom half for mine. But I kind of think that you can wait a little bit because you're going with that being kind of the not so big name half of the draw. I think you can wait and you're still going to get decent odds as you progress a little bit further in the tournament. So I'd be sitting pat, but that's the area that I'm looking towards at this stage. But I would say for me, even in this tournament in general, I'm just very excited to see how some of these guys who've been able to surge since the tour restarted continue on with their form, here. And then obviously we'll get a little bit of a break before we go into the Melbourne Spring. But I want to see how they handle some of these big matches so I can get a little bit of a gauge with, was this just like a little bit of a hot streak? Some of these guys were able to take advantage while some of the top guys either weren't playing or had injuries or whatnot, or are some of these guys for real and ones I want to keep an eye on as we get into next season.
Perfect. Sounds good to me. Look, from my perspective, I'm probably going to wait and see on one more row on each performance before considering maybe jumping in there. I don't think we're going to lose too much value in terms of the prices on a couple of these top players. And the other thing I think just I touched on at the start, just a hunch that I would anticipate that if we do get a Carreño Busta versus Nadal quarterfinal, that we're probably going to get value on Carreño Busta, and that's probably one to keep an eye on as well. I don't think Pablo can win the whole tournament, but I think he's capable of that upset on his indoor hardcourt form. And with Nadal playing not a lot of indoor hardcourt tennis of late, obviously Paris on hardcourt hasn't been as happy a hunting ground as clay for him, but we don't normally see Nadal at this stage of the year so fresh as well. Normally he's put together an incredibly heavy schedule. So they're probably the things that I'll be keeping an eye on. And Candice, you made a good point that it isn't that far away. I think I saw it's only 50 days until Christmas. And then my Christmas comes about a week later when the Australian summer of tennis starts.
I thought everything was ahead for you.
Pardon?
I thought everything was like 3 or 4 days ahead. Isn't it like next week already?
Well, look, I guess my next question is, by the Australian Open, will you know who your president is?
I really hope the answer to that's yes.
What are the odds on that?
I don't see that anywhere. I was actually just looking. Biden's a big favorite right now.
Like under 35 days or something.
But I don't see that. I know I think that was something you could bet on, whether or not we had a president by January 1st. I think the way it works technically is if it's really up in the air, the House of Representatives makes a decision like the first week of January or something. So it's going to be close.
Now, I might just quickly, there's one question here from Gonza Diaz that I'll just quickly address. Around one of the Challenger tournaments, you got Mazzetti versus Makora over 21 at $1.90, which I do like. I think Makora's serve, he's looked pretty good this week, and Mazzetti comes with there's a lot of appeal, I guess, with the surname, and everyone saw him with his form leading into the French Open, and he's one of those up and coming players along with Alcaraz and a couple of others. I would be leaning towards the over 21.5 games there as well, so I would tend to agree with that one. Now, Australian Open. Weird. It seems like the 2020 version was years ago. It was an interesting summer in terms of obviously what was going on with, there was bushfires here and things were quite up in the air, and we thought that was going to be the biggest issue for tennis in 2020. How wrong we were. I've got the odds up here on the screen now, and I know that yourself, Alex, and I think a few others have decided to bring Andre Rublev's price in from $41 or plus 4,100 into plus 2,300. But question to either of you, any names standing out here at the moment? And I guess from my perspective, I generally look at the longer odds because, look, I don't really want to be giving a bookmaker my money for a couple of months for a plus 110 on Novak, if I'm completely honest. But I don't know if you guys may have different opinions here. You
tried to look around. I mean, the big number that stuck out to me was Krajinovic. I know that, he got bounced in the first round here, but I think that the quicker conditions there might suit him well. At 130 to 1, I wonder if, he comes out, plays well in like a warm-up event or something. Does that number come down, closer to the 60s or something? That was the big triple-digit number that stuck out to me. Candice, was there any big numbers that stuck out to you?
Not at this stage, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, I just don't see the value that's there. And I think that's always what's difficult when we look at the men, is it is so top heavy that for these long range wagers, outright victory, I just don't often see the value there, because even the guys who you're like, okay, I could plausibly see this, they're the ones who are hammered in the most. They're the ones who I find to be under the odds even more than like a Djokovic or a Federer or Nadal. So for this one, I would be staying away.
Yeah, maybe look around for some stale numbers. I know that you might be able to do a little better on Demon Hour than 55 to 1. I'd want something pretty close to 100 on him. Look around. Some people have been kind of lazy to update some of these, and maybe you can get a good number still on him. Rublev, like you said, Steve, we're hoping for 40 to 1 there. I don't know if 40 is around, but I've seen some 30 to 35s, and I don't mind that. I think that number just continues to get lower and lower and lower.
Yeah, look, I tend to agree. And just using this market as an example, they're obviously keeping a couple of names who can be a little bit hit and miss, very, very safe. You've got Kyrgios there at plus 2,600. Who, look, from what I've seen, he looks incredibly fit, but it's, who knows, coming off no tennis. And it depends on how much tennis a lot of these players play. If we're looking at all the players staying in Melbourne for, up to 6 weeks of tennis, it might be interesting to see, I guess, the schedules that the different players look at here, particularly with the ATP Cup and the ranking points freeze. It's all going to be a little bit convoluted. But look, it's going to be hot, assuming, when you look at the weather from the last couple of years in particular, you're probably looking at the moment, I wouldn't be jumping out at Novak plus 110, which is a really weird thing to say, considering he's won it a ridiculous number of times. Federer's too short. Medvedev's too short on form. Team, you could maybe make a case for. Zverev, yeah, it's not. I'm not looking at that going, well, that's fantastic. If you think and look, if the weather is going to be really, really hot, you can maybe look down to kind of a, Bautista are good at plus, 70, plus 7,000.
70 to 1, yeah.
70 to 1. But on recent form, I mean, look, at the bottom of that list, and obviously the list continues on, you've got Carreño Busta there, who's 130 to 1, who he's played pretty well on some of the hardcourt slams recently. There are obviously a lot more players down there beyond the 180 to 1. I was talking to you guys off air before. I decided to cut the list off there because next on the list was Sam Querrey. Obviously, we don't know where Sam Querrey is at the moment, and I hope it's it's very Carmen San Diego kind of. Where is he? Where's he? What's going on?
We need like the striped shirt.
We just know he's in a giraffe costume wherever he is.
So we're not really sure what's going on there, but look, that's fantastic. And look, there's a good point here, from Gonza again around Andy Murray. Look, the odds for Andy Murray are always going to be unders, just based off surname. I mean, he's a Sir. He's knighted. He's never going to be value in these particular markets, and playing 7 best-of-5 set matches, he's going to need to put together an incredible off-season or pre-season, I think, to be worth that price. And if you had to pick, you'd be looking at Shapovalov or Raonic or even Sinner, I think, over Andy Murray on what we've seen. Now, this is probably a little bit more in your wheelhouse, Alex. If we just flick over to
The one thing I will say, and you can say as you flip over, I think you're right about the top names. I mean, those are the players that are probably going to win. But, thinking about it from a handicapping perspective, don't bet that now. Those numbers aren't going to change. Djokovic, that number's not going to get any tighter. I don't think your team number is going to get really much better than that. So, look again, when you're betting this early, you're looking for the bigger numbers because those are the ones that are going to drop. I think basically the top 6 guys at this point, 6 to 7 guys are probably all going to be the same price, the week before.
Now, the list for the men's that we just had before there obviously went down as far as 180 to 1. We only get down to 70 to 1 here in the women's, and there is a significant number of players here to digest. Any particular standouts looking at those prices? We'll start with you, Alex.
Yeah, as I start to flip through, I mean, the first couple names I think are either priced correctly or incorrectly to the point where you can't bet on them. You just can't bet on Serena Williams. I don't know if she can stay healthy for 2 weeks and play tennis. It would be great. I would really love to see it. Maybe some fun, fear of missing out, bet a little bit of that. Ashley Barty just took the year off. I think all that we've seen her doing is drinking and watching Australian football or rugby or whatever she's into. Osaka 7.5 to 1. That's a pretty solid number. Andriescu at 10 to 1 is really interesting. She was being interviewed recently. It seems like she's getting healthy and she might be in shape. Again, if she looks good in a warm-up tournament, start to try to grab some numbers on her because that'll go from 10 to 1 down to 6 to 7, I think, pretty quickly. And then as you start to get above that, you have Halep 11 to 1, the defending champion at 12 to 1. I don't think I really want anybody in kind of that murky spot. When you start to get to people like Elena Rybakina at 30 to 1, that's really interesting. Jennifer Brady 30 to 1. I think that those two numbers are really interesting to me. I think that, if I was pricing this, that they would have better odds than a lot of the women that you're seeing before them. Those are the two numbers that really stuck out to me kind of in that range. From a long shot perspective, I know that a lot of people like to characterize the WTA as a lot of people having a chance, and that's true, but it's not a lot of people really at some of these higher odds. I mean, even somebody like Ostapenko, somebody like Martic, they might be able to redline for a week, but generally you can't keep it together for 2 weeks. So I don't see any really huge numbers, but the ones that I'd be looking at and seeing if maybe I could do a little better than Jennifer Brady 30 to 1 and Elena Rybakina 30 to 1.
Now, I grabbed these odds this morning, and probably two things to probably keep an eye on is Julia Gerges retired, and she's still on the market there at the bottom.
That was the first thing I saw, too. I was like, well, if Alex did it, we wouldn't have a retired player in the market.
Yeah. And the other one is Kiki Burton's just had Achilles surgery, so I think she might be in doubt as well, or potentially even out. So that's probably something to keep an eye on. So outside of retired players being in this particular market, anything else stand out to you, Candice?
I mean, it's hit or miss whether or not the odds are there. I certainly couldn't go any shorter than what you have, but I'm intrigued by Pliskova. I won't be the only one there. I'm sure it feels like we've been waiting for her to get that first Grand Slam victory for a long time. For me, I kind of like the fact that she has the coaching change coming into this. Obviously, 2020 for her was not ideal. She played poorly by her standards. We know this surface is just fine for her, though, and I'm thinking maybe a coaching change, it can kind of give you a little bit of optimism or amp you up a little bit. Sometimes what you just need is something different to bring out the best in you, and she's so close. I mean, she's not far away at all from getting something like this done. Again, sitting at the odds that we're seeing there, 18, that's right on the cusp of what I would be willing to take. But Pliskova would be the one I'd be watching now.
Yeah, look, it's getting to that point now because over the last couple of years you've looked at it, and Pliskova, she's normally come into this as kind of a top 3 chance in terms of the odds, and to have 9 players ahead of her at the moment, it is a bit of an indication of how even things are. Looking at past form in Melbourne, using it as an example, I mean, you can maybe make a case for Danielle Collins at 55 to 1 there. She can put together, obviously a lot will need to go right for her there. Sabalenka has played some pretty solid tennis recently at 25 to 1, but hasn't quite broken through in the slams. If you want an ultra consistent player, that Elise Mertens there at 38 to 1, but look, it's so even. And it would be interesting, I think, to have a look, particularly with this market, over the next kind of month or two leading up into the Australian Open as to where the money is going here, because there are so many different players taking so many different paths here. Obviously, Barty hasn't left Australia since March. Osaka has played such little tennis, but when she's played, she's pretty much won everything that she's played. You've got Kennan, who's a defending champion, but at 12 to 1, and Muguruza, who she met in the finals at 13 to 1. There's just a lot there to digest, and I think I've said this a couple of times on a couple of shows that I've done this year. I think the women's game is much better placed for the next 5 to 10 years than the men's. That you can look and you look at this group here of players, and there are so many young players coming through. from so many different parts of the world. It's a great chance, I think, for the women's tour to kind of overtake the men's over the next 5 years, particularly with the likes of Federer and Nadal getting towards the end. Novak's Novak. I could talk about Novak for hours and hours, but I won't do it at the moment. But I think it's a really great chance here, and this is probably, I think this could be one of the most competitive Grand Slams that we have seen on the women's side for some time, and I just hope that there is at least some sort of crowd there for it. I think it would be a shame to let this group of players go around and not have a significant crowd here in Melbourne, in a state that's been, we haven't had a lot to really watch over the last 6 months. Our Australian rules football got taken away to another state. Things are just starting to get on top, so it's going to be interesting to see what unfolds and whether these odds change. I think over the with the news coming up that we should know in the next week or two what January will look like. All the other states in Australia have to come up with plans of how players are able to quarantine and travel from state to state. And if they can't come up with anything, everything's going to be in Melbourne. So it's going to be a very, very big 6 weeks or so for Australian tennis. Any final thoughts on this particular market from either of you?
No, nothing for me.
Cool. Well, I think we've touched on, everything we really wanted to talk about for today. I know, obviously, Candice, you've got a big day with the Oaks about to kick off, so
we're just getting started.
No, exactly. It's 10:15 in the morning here, and look, I didn't sleep too much because I was watching the live odds of Trump versus Biden and watching the Betfair market edge towards $800 million matched.
Oh yeah.
It's been quite a roller coaster, and obviously, I think they're probably loving that it's close because it's going to mean more people are piling into that market over the next days or weeks or months or whatever happens. But we might wrap it up there for now. Good luck today. Do you have any tips for us for Oaks Day?
Oh, I don't.
Besides Flemington being an absolute pain to bet at, it should be an interesting day. Was it day 3 of the Melbourne Cup Carnival? You're only halfway there.
I am. We're still chugging along, trying to find some winners along the way.
Alrighty. And Alex, how are you? What's your next little period of time looking like with not a lot of women's tennis on?
Well, we've got Lynn's coming up next week, so I've got one more full WTA tournament. The ITF has been nice enough to have like an 80 to 100 point event every week, which is like 2/3 to 3/4 of a premier anyway. So they've had some nice fields. I'm trying to, slowly keep myself alive betting those little things, but a lot of homework diving into stuff. I guess the only thing I've noticed, if take a look at your odds in the NBA. If you've got the Golden State Warriors at 10 to 1 or better to win the championship next year, scoop that up. It's still floating around at a few places. I would actually go anywhere 9 or better, but I think you can get a 10 to better if you really hunt around. So digging into some stuff like that and trying to get ready for next season.
Perfect. Sounds good. Well, thank you everyone who's kind of tuned in and popped some questions up. And look, we'll try and put a couple of pieces up over the next couple of days. And look, if we've said anything good, we might see if we can rehash that. But thank you, Candice, and thank you, Alex, for joining. And let's do this again sometime soon.
Looking forward to it.
All righty. Thank you. And thank you very much for everyone who's tuned in and who's watching this back at a later date. We'll pop this up so you can catch us on Twitter, on YouTube at Ace Previews. We're on now. Look, Alex is a little bit old for this, but we're on Twitch at Ace_Previews as well. It's TWICH.
Aren't you taking something for that? I thought you had that corrected. Anyway, sorry.
And also on Facebook.
Violation.
And on Facebook at Ace Previews as well. So look, there's a lot of places to watch it, but we'll be back soon. And thank you very much for tuning in.